25 centuries before a single ballot was ever cast in the modern world, an assembly of thousands gathered beneath a thatched roof to vote on matters of war and peace. This was not Athens. This was not Rome. This was Vaishali, a city on the banks of the Gandhara River in northern India, and what happened there would help define the very idea of self-governance in Asia. By the 6th century BCE, the fertile plains of the Ganges had become a crucible of change. Iron plows tore into soil that had once resisted the bronze tools of earlier generations. Surplus grain fed growing populations. Trade routes stitched together a patchwork of walled cities, and with wealth came ambition. Out of this ferment rose 16 great powers, remembered in ancient Buddhist and Jain texts as the Sixteen Mahajanapadas, the 16 great realms. Their names still echo through history: Magadha, Kosala, Vajji, Avanti, Vatsa, Gandhara, Cambodia, Kuru, Panchala, Matsya, Surasena, Asaka, Chedi, Malla, Anga, and Kashi. What made this era extraordinary was not merely the number of these states, but the sheer diversity of how they were ruled. Some were monarchies, ruled by kings who claimed divine sanction and hereditary right. Others were something far rarer in the ancient world: Ganasangas, oligarchic or republican confederacies, where power was shared among assemblies of clan chiefs and elders. In an age when most of humanity bowed to a single throne, a cluster of Indian states was experimenting with collective rule. Vaishali stood as the crown jewel of this republican experiment. It was the capital of the Lichavi clan, one of the most powerful members of the Vajji confederacy, a union of 8 allied clans bound together for mutual defense and governance. At the heart of Vaishali stood the santhagara, a great assembly hall where thousands of Lichavi representatives gathered to deliberate. Decisions were not whispered in a palace chamber, but debated aloud, argued over, and settled through consensus or vote. A Ganapati, an elected chief, presided over these sessions, but he held no absolute power. He was first among equals, bound by the will of the assembly. This was the political climate into which 2 of history's most transformative spiritual teachers were born. Siddhartha Gautama, the future Buddha, grew up among the Shakyas, a smaller republic allied with the larger Vajji tradition of collective rule. He would later structure his own monastic order, the Sangha, on the very model of these republican assemblies, monks gathering to debate, to vote, to reach consensus on matters of discipline and doctrine. Mahavira, the 24th Tirthankara of Jainism, was born in Kundagrama, near Vaishali itself, into the Lichavi nobility. Both men watched empires rise through conquest, and both offered visions of order rooted not in domination, but in restraint, ethics, and community. Yet not every Mahajanapada shared this taste for shared power. To the south and east lay Magadha, a kingdom that would prove the great counterexample, and ultimately, the destroyer of the very republics that inspired the Buddha's teachings. Magadha's rise began under King Bimbisara, a shrewd and patient ruler who understood that marriage could conquer where armies might fail. He wed princesses from Kosala and from the Madra clan, weaving alliances that secured Magadha's borders, while its rivals wore themselves down through endless warfare. Bimbisara's capital, Rajagriha, nestled among 5 hills, became a fortress of ambition, drawing merchants, philosophers, and diplomats alike. But Bimbisara's own son would prove that ambition recognizes no loyalty, not even to blood. Ajatashatru, driven by hunger for the throne, imprisoned his father and, according to tradition, left him to starve to death in a dungeon. Patricide cleared his path to power, and once crowned, Ajatashatru turned his gaze toward the one force capable of rivaling Magadha's dominance, the Vajji Confederacy and its formidable republic at Vaishali. War between Magadha and the Vajjis dragged on for years, and it was not won on the battlefield alone. Ajatashatru dispatched his minister, Vatsakara, on a mission of quiet sabotage. Vatsakara arrived in Vaishali feigning disgrace, exiled and bitter, seeking refuge among the Lichavis. For years he lived among them, worming his way into their confidence, and slowly, patiently, he planted seeds of suspicion between the confederated clans. Whispers of betrayal spread. Alliances that had once bound the Vajjis together in unshakable unity began to fracture from within. When the Lichavis could no longer trust one another, their legendary solidarity, the very source of their strength, collapsed. On the battlefield, Ajatashatru unveiled weapons the Gangetic world had never seen. Ancient texts describe the Mahashilakantaka, a catapult capable of hurling massive stones with devastating force, and the Rathamusala, a chariot fitted with rotating blades that could cut through ranks of infantry like a scythe through wheat. Between fractured alliances and terrifying new engines of war, the great Republic of Vaishali finally fell. The Vajji Confederacy, once a beacon of collective governance, was absorbed into the growing body of Magadha. Magadha's appetite did not stop there. It swallowed Kashi, whose capital Varanasi had long been a center of learning and trade. It absorbed Anga to the east, rich in resources and river commerce. One by one, the 16 kingdoms began to lose their independence, pulled into the orbit of a single, relentless power. Elsewhere across the map, other Mahajanapadas played out their own dramas. In Kosala, King Prasenajit ruled from the city of Shravasti, a contemporary and sometime friend of the Buddha, whose court became a meeting ground for philosophers and ascetics of every persuasion. In Vatsa, King Udayana ruled from Kaushambi, a city so celebrated for its wealth and romance that later poets would spin entire dramas from tales of his court. In Avanti, King Pradyota governed from Ujjaini, a city that would remain a center of astronomy and trade for centuries after his reign ended. Far to the northwest, Gandhara flourished around the city of Taxila, a crossroads of cultures where Persian, Greek, and Indian ideas would eventually mingle, and where a great center of learning drew students from across the subcontinent. Beyond it lay Cambodia, on the fringes of the Indian world, known for its horses and its hardy, independent people. But it was Magadha's trajectory that would shape the next great chapter of Indian history. After Ajatashatru, later kings continued to expand Magadha's reach, until eventually a new dynasty, the Nandas, inherited and expanded this legacy of centralized power, amassing wealth and armies on a scale that stunned even foreign observers. It was this same Magadhan foundation that would, within another century, give rise to Chandragupta Maurya, and to an empire that stretched from the mountains of Afghanistan to the shores of the Bay of Bengal, the first empire to unite nearly the entire Indian subcontinent under a single crown. The age of the 16 Mahajanapadas did not end in a single dramatic moment. It dissolved gradually, kingdom by kingdom, republic by republic, swallowed into the expanding ambitions of Magadha. Yet what it left behind was extraordinary. It left behind the philosophical revolutions of Buddhism and Jainism, both born from the political air of debate and dissent that the republics had cultivated. It left behind the memory, preserved in Buddhist scripture, that governance need not always flow from a single throne, that assemblies, councils, and shared deliberation had once flourished on the same soil that would later birth mighty empires. Today, historians piece together this era from Buddhist chronicles, Jain scriptures, and fragments of later Sanskrit texts, each offering glimpses of a world in transition. It was a world where kings warred and republics debated, where new religions questioned old rituals, and where the very shape of power in South Asia was being tested, argued, and forged. Long before democracy found its name in Greek city-states half a world away, the assembly halls of Vaishali had already asked the same fundamental question that still echoes today: who has the right to rule, and who gets a voice in deciding it? If you enjoyed this story, please hit the like button and subscribe for more untold history every single day. See you in the next one.